Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us again on whatever platform you're listening on and wherever you are currently listening. Now, today's topic is going to be about accountability, especially with the little things and holding players accountable to those little things. Accountability is a word that we hear so often in the coaching world, and it's worth dedicating its own episode to. So we're going to be talking about holding players accountable, what that looks like on and off the court, and like I said at the beginning, holding those players accountable even for those, so-called little things. So to help discuss this topic, I'm very happy to be joined by Coach Christina Raiti. Coach, how are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm glad to have you here to talk about this subject because, again, accountability, we hear the word used a lot, but I think it's worth, just talking about what that means and what that looks like in a basketball sense. So really looking forward to getting into this. So, Coach, let's go ahead and get started with an introduction to you, your basketball journey, your coaching journey, where's it taken you, and where you're currently at right now.
Yeah. So my basketball journey, geez. I played high school basketball at Long Island Lutheran, Lou High, where I currently am now. And after I played, it's a small school in Brookville, New York, kind of hidden. Not many people knew about it. The prior head coach had reached out at the time, and I actually grew up 15 minutes down the block and didn't even know it existed. So I said to my mother, I'm not going to a place called Lou High. So I played for 4 years. I had a great experience. I went on to play at Trinity College in the NESCAC for 4 years. And then when I graduated, I knew I wanted to get back into coaching. I'd always been in the AAU world a little bit. I've had teams pretty much since I was a junior in high school and just really enjoyed getting them from a young age and really teaching the basics. And after I graduated, I came back to coach at Lou High for the head coach, Rich Slater, at the time. I knew I wanted to learn as much as I possibly could and kind of see what avenue I was trying to take. And I became the assistant athletic director at Lou High after subbing a little bit and receiving my master's, and things sort of started falling into place a little bit. Most recently, I started my own youth sports company called Empire Youth Athletics, which the mission is about little things. So I'm excited to really delve into that. And this past April, our head coach, after 10 years, had stepped down at Lou High, and I was offered the position to take over our nationally ranked program. So that's where we are now. A little bit of a crazy year for the first one. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's been a great ride so far, and it's kind of just starting again.
Right. So you're kind of like a local story, so to speak, from
Yes.
Lou High and everything. No, I think that's great. I always love hearing about coaches who talk about, going back to their home area, or sometimes their high school that they went to and played at. Like it's always must be fun for that journey to kind of come full circle like that. So I think that's great. So you touched on it, and I'm going to touch on it as well, about Empire Youth Athletics. And it's just interesting to me to hear about coaches and not only coach at a school, but then they go like a step further, and then they go and branch out into other areas to get involved in other areas to stay active. And I find that really admirable. So I want to talk about that. What is your mission? What is Empire Youth Athletics? What made you inspired to kind of get that going? And what was that journey like?
Yeah, so I've always worked for a ton of AAU programs throughout the years. And we really, a group of myself and two colleagues actually, who I went to high school with, they were seniors when I was freshman. We came together and we said, we really feel there's a need for a different type of AAU. Aside from the traditional, you play to be on social media and yada, yada, yada. It's about what jersey you're putting on and it's gotten away from where we were younger. You tried out for one program and you made that team. And if you made that team, it was a big deal. And if you didn't, you tried again next year. Not that I don't want to say it's totally watered down, but the idea of AAU has changed. So we really wanted to find an AAU program that was less focused on offense and scoring 20 and being on the right platform and all of those things. And it's not to say that's not important in the recruiting world, but we wanted something for younger kids. That's how it started, really, to learn the fundamentals, but also to learn the intangible objects, which were being lost in AAU, right? We traditionally think that that happens in the high school world when coaches have them for an abundance of time and whatnot. And AAU was run up and down. You need to get into shape. There's maybe 1 or 2 practices a week. I don't want to speak on behalf of every program, but that was the trend in New York of where things were really going. And there are some wonderful, wonderful AAU coaches out there who have taught us so much. And it was just taking bits of pieces of everything that we learned and then really having an emphasis on, can we make coachable athletes? Can we bring an insane amount of energy? Can we require and hold these kids accountable to doing the little things? So it honestly started with the whole Steve Nash study of how many positive interactions he has during a basketball game. And someone counted them, and it's an insane number. And when you tell the kids at the beginning of our clinics and our training sessions, they look at you like, 185 positive interactions? Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
So, and we talk about what those look like. It's obviously not just high fives, but it's pointing at somebody if they give you a good pass. And we really, really try to demand that during all of our workouts. By no means do we have the most talented kids, but we have kids who are really passionate about getting better and showing up. And we always ask, okay, like, you're here, you have to have fun. You have to give 110, right? Like if you're here, you come on a Monday night, whatever day of the week, and you're not having fun, there's a problem. And if you're not giving 110, why are you here? But then that extra step is pushing somebody else to get better. So like for the hour and a half that we're together, your teammates, you should know everybody's name, whether you've just met them 5 minutes ago, whether you've known them for however long, but are you pushing someone else to get better? So that's how Empire came about a little bit.
And it sounds like, you know, a lot of your, you know, kind of personality is really, really in it, and your philosophy is in it. And like we talked about with the idea about accountability and the little things like that, it seems to me like that's something that you really value, and that maybe you didn't notice it as much, or maybe it wasn't as, you know, obvious in other programs that you saw. And
Right.
so that was something that was really important to you, that you want to make sure that you were really intentional about that, and that the players who are involved know that, hey, this experience might be a little bit different than other experiences are.
Exactly.
So again, our topic today is on accountability, and even if it is accountability on those little things. So let's start more in general for you. What does accountability mean to you in the basketball sense? When you think about, as a coach, you know, I'm going to hold my team, I'm going to hold my players accountable. What does that mean to you?
I think in general, and a very loose way of explaining it, is just setting a standard and then carrying out that standard, and making sure that whatever you do, that's a non-negotiable for you. Like we always say, you have your negotiables where, okay, like you're flexible, different things, different times, but when you have a program, AAU, high school, middle school, whatever that program looks like, whatever sport that looks like, I think coaches come up with their non-negotiables. I am not okay with kids being late. I am not okay with us walking to drills. And regardless, I think being able to hold your kids to those standards, that's how I define holding them accountable. Something we talk a lot about, and this is something that we haven't fully achieved yet at where I am and where I've been, is a player-led accountable system. I think traditionally speaking, we speak about accountability, and coaches hold everyone accountable. You lay out the ground rules, you give your guidelines. Some coaches have contracts that they have kids sign, like that's holding people accountable. But I think something just delving a little bit deeper, and the really great programs, which separates good from great, is the programs who have their kids hold each other accountable.
And I think that's definitely where a lot of programs would love to get to, where the players know the expectations, and they know what is expected, and they're keeping each other accountable, because then it also takes a little bit of work off of the coach too, when the players are the ones saying it. And I think that players, I'm not saying they don't listen to their coaches, but it really does mean something when like another player is telling them like, hey, you know, you don't walk into this drill, or, you know, you better make sure you're on time. I think It's kind of like the
Absolutely.
perfect world type situation. Yeah. So you talked about the idea about like setting standards and carrying out that standards. And I think that one of the tricky things for a lot of coaches is wondering how many to set to where it's not so overwhelming, where a team feels like, there's all these standards, there's all these things and being held accountable. But at the same time, there are certain ones that have to be in place. So throughout your coaching journey, how has that process been like? How many standards or non-negotiables do you feel like you have? And has that kind of changed over the years at all?
It has totally changed.
Mm-hmm.
When I first started, it was like, all right, here are guidelines, here are 100 rules. I would say to our head coach at the time, you need to have 100 rules. Like we need to list every possible thing that could happen. And I think as time has gone on, I've learned that to an extent, discipline is freedom, which is actually a phrase that our athletic trainer tells me all the time. I'm OCD. I am so OCD. Like I need everything in front of me, everything planned out. And I think as I've taken on different types of roles and have interacted with different type of athletes, I've realized it's less about the amount of standards and just more about picking out which ones are your non-negotiables and which are the most important to you. I think if you have 100 rules, there's a higher chance, like kids aren't remembering all of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if there's a million things, but if there are 4 things that they really, really have to make their non-negotiables, and I'm very fortunate to be surrounded by great colleagues. A colleague of mine who's a college coach had sent me over some of his stuff for his D3 team when he had taken over as a head coach for the first time. He said, I have 4 non-negotiables, and they cover pretty much everything. Because I said to him, I looked at him like, listen, I'm going to have my first team meeting as a head coach. And I think there are so many rules. And he's like, yeah, listen, it's all up to styles. But he said, I ask our guys to be honest. I ask them to be on time. I ask them to be respectful. And I ask them to hold each other accountable. And, like when I put my list together, all the standards that I was coming up with fit into those 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's much easier to relay that message, communicate that message, and to like live it every day if they're small, compact, and the players are constantly understanding and interacting with them.
And I'm sure it has to make your life a little easier too, when you don't have to, cite 100 different rules or cite all these different rules that they broke. And I think that hopefully the players, maybe in a way, maybe they feel like a little bit less pressure when it's like, okay, it's just these 4 things that I have to hold to. But those 4 things, like you said, cover so much, but they don't have to necessarily worry about like, oh, is this, rule 20 or rule like 44 or something like
Exactly.
that. So might give them a little bit more breathing room as well, I feel.
I think it also just builds the trust between coaches and players. Like we're obviously not hoping they get in trouble. Our lives are so much easier if they don't, and they take care of business on the court and in the classroom, like you said earlier. So I think that trust of, all right, like we're not putting these in place for when you get in trouble. We're putting these in place because this is our culture of the program. This is what our expectations are, and this is what you will be held accountable to. Our goal is to not have to run because of these or anything along those lines. But we're not saying like, don't chew gum in class, something silly like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where we're expecting them to break a rule. And we've had really challenging teams in the past where we were dealing with discipline. So this has been trial and error, honestly. Like we've had teams where we've had to be more strict with, and I think it all depends on the level of, are your kids buying into the culture? Do they trust you? What is your relationship like with them? And as we move towards this year with a little bit more freedom of those and kind of having those 4 non-negotiables, I mean, I'll let you know how it works.
Well, yeah. And I know that when you have to, kind of step away from what you inside feel, like you said, like, oh, I have OCD and I want to do this, and this, but you have to let go. You sort of have to kind of let them do it and then like see how it goes. And I'm sure you'll be holding your breath a little bit and hoping for the best. But I think that like you said, it's just a lot easier if you just maybe have a few, and then, you can say like, okay, well, this happened, like what of these four, standards that we set does this fall under? And hopefully I'll have some success with that. And as we know, and as you just mentioned, one of the things that will happen is, players are going to walk to drills, players are going to be, late, and you are going to have to hold them accountable for that. So when these, I don't call them rules or whatever the standards you set in place, when they're being challenged or when you feel like your players aren't following through with those, what's the next step? How do you hold them accountable when those situations arise?
I think it kind of looks different for every player. I would love to say if a kid is not respectful or doesn't walk to a drill. I mean, some are definitely more set in stone. Like if a kid falls and they don't run to pick her up, which is one of our things that like we focus on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you get a warning, and the second time we're just gonna run. Like little things like that, right? But if a kid's not talking during a drill and we expect them to, I think it totally depends on our relationship as coaches with the kid. There are certain kids where you need to pull to the side, put your arm around them and be like, hey, we're talking about you growing with leadership. I need you to speak during these drills. Where there are other kids where you can get on them a little bit. You can yell and you can hold them responsible. I mean, I'll never forget our past head coach when I played at Lou High. It was the type of thing where if so-and-so wasn't doing the right thing, it was, Christina, your fault. It doesn't matter. Like, you could have been doing the perfect thing, but you want to be a captain one day, it's your fault. Like, you should have told her. And I think there are kids you can do that with, and there are kids where you kind of have to have a different approach with. And you start to feel it out. So it's not to say that it's necessarily break this one, we do this. I think it's definitely situational.
Mm-hmm.
I think the whole team is always involved, and just understanding our standards and our I guess, yeah, I mean, our standards and whatnot, but I think it's different situationally, and your approach with how you interact with different kids and get the most out of them can't be the same across the board.
And have you found in your own experience any sort of issues where players feel that they're being treated differently or unfairly than others because like, oh, like, this happened when this player did it, but it's not happening when I'm doing it? Because like you said, you kind of, it looks different for every player. Have you ever had any challenges where players feel that things are ever being unfair, or have things in your playing experience or coaching experience worked out with that so far?
No, it's definitely happened. I think the things that are more set in stone, like if a kid is late to class, that's pretty standard across the board. This way, if so-and-so is late to class, they understand that when this kid is late to class, those types of things aren't different. But when our 7th grader is not speaking during a drill and our senior's not speaking during a drill, that conversation has to look a little different. And that they understand when that communication happens. I think it's when there's just I don't even want to call it a punishment, but when there's a punishment and there's no communication afterwards, when it's left to kind of speculate and, oh, well, wait a second, you didn't just get on her. Well, yeah, she's been with us for 2 weeks and you've been with us for 3 years. You know what I mean? So I definitely think there's a wide spectrum of types of things and whatnot. But again, anything that's black and white, or so to speak, or if you break one of our rules, okay, like we're going to run. You're late to practice. It's never going to be different for different players. Like you got to do what you got to do. But in regards to those little things, you just expect more. Certain kids know more. And then as those kids get older, you expect the same thing from them. So full picture, they're going to understand that they were treated the same way in stages. Right. But I really think it comes down to just communicating about it. And why did I just make you do that? Sometimes they have no idea. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. And you have to tell them why.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's sometimes I know as like a coach, you say something or there's some consequence and you think they understand why, but then they don't. And you have to know that. You have to be like, wait a minute, okay, we have to have this conversation and figure out like, okay, this is why this is happening. And I think that kind of goes a little bit into kind of a follow-up question I had about the concept of like buy-in, because for you and your staff to be holding a team accountable, the players have to buy in that, okay, this is something that I'm with and I agree with, and I'm willing to be held accountable to this. Has that always been something easy for you, where your players bought into what you're holding them accountable for? Has there ever been like pushback on that? What's been your experience with that?
No, that's a great question. I think we've been really fortunate. I'm a part of a great school where there's a lot of tradition, and kids who come here, they come because they want to be great. So they're essentially all giving something up. We have kids that come from the city. We have kids who take the train here. We have kids from other countries who leave their parents at the age of 15, 16. So for the most part, when they join and they become a part of our program and they start our preseason, they're bought in because they've made the commitment that they want to be great. Of course, there's always situational kids are not as bought in as you think. Like, kids say they want to be great. Are they not showing it?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, about, well, what it means to them, right? I didn't mean to cut you off, but when I hear that, like, you want to be great, but do they know what that means? Like, do they know what they're going to be held accountable for them to be great? I guess would be my thought.
That's a good one. I don't think they always know up front. I think a lot of people say they want to be great, and it's such a complex question, honestly, because what does it take to be great? To some people, that means staying in here for 7 hours or getting shots up 3 times a day. I think that looks different to every kid, and I think a lot of the time they're shell-shocked when they get here. They say they want to play at the college level. The biggest thing is, I want to play Division I basketball. Okay, well, what does that mean? You know what I mean? Why don't you want to play Division II? Why don't you want to play Division III? You could still be great and do those things. And I think for kids here, it's balance. Like when before they come to our school and we're trying to attract student athletes, it has to be the right fit, right? So it needs to be a kid who understands how important academics are. We have spirituality going at our school, and that's a big piece of Lehigh. And then you have to want to practice great to be great. And if you don't want those things, I think it almost weeds itself out early on. And for the most part, and I don't want to say absolutely 100%, but the kids are buying into the idea that they want to be prepared both on and off the court to get to the next level and be successful.
Well, that's a good point that you bring up. I think in terms of like when you kind of get to know your players and kind of know what their goals are, that sort of leads into like some level of individual accountability. Like, what are you looking to get out of this experience? Like, if you're looking to, go to D1, then there is a certain amount of accountability that you're gonna have to accept, and you're going to be held to, that is going to look wildly different than somebody who maybe doesn't have those aspirations. And so I think that it's interesting. It seems like in your situation, you have like the team accountability, and like, here are the standards that are put in place for this team. But then it seems like you also have individuals on your team who have different aspirations for where they want like the game to take them. And that also requires different levels of accountability for them to be held to as well.
It's definitely a journey in both of them. I think, honestly, you can't have team accountability if you don't have individual accountability. And I think that looks very different for every kid. And when they start to realize that, and when they start to notice that, I mean, you have kids who get 200 shots up a day, and then there are other kids who are used to having their name in the paper and that's never been a part of their routine. And we ask those things of them. We ask them to be the first kid in the gym and the last kid to leave. And I think that's part of the process that they start to understand here. But until they hold themselves accountable, if you don't show up every day, how can you be a leader? Right? Like, how are our younger kids supposed to look up to you if you're not showing up? And that's you holding yourself accountable. But we can't have team accountability if our leaders aren't taking care of those things on their own.
Right. And I think that something that kind of fascinates me about this topic, because I haven't really been in this situation, but I've talked to a couple coaches who have, and you are as well, is you have players who have these certain aspirations and are really looking to be pushed, but yet it's probability that some of their teammates aren't necessarily like on that same path, and aren't going to maybe necessarily put in the same amount of time because maybe they don't have like a D1 aspirations. So are those conversations that you almost need to have with these players where it's like, I know that this is where you want to get to, and this is the amount of work that you need to do, but you can't like be frustrated, or you can't like get too upset if the other people on your team aren't really like going to put that amount of work in? I'm always fascinated about how that dynamic kind of works out.
That this might not be the most popular response to this.
That's okay.
I'm going to say they can be frustrated with other people who aren't willing to put in that amount of work, only because the kids that come here are all coming for a common goal. We want to be a nationally ranked program. We want to win a New York State championship every single year that we compete.
Mm-hmm.
And all these kids, they say they want to be great on and off the court at the next level and to be prepared. So I know it might not be the most popular answer.
No, that's okay.
But if there's a kid that hasn't learned that yet, they might not be for us. And that sounds a little harsh, but I think they're going to have a tougher time, because there are girls in this program who will turn around and say, we don't do that here. Like, you have to go hard in every single drill. You have to put the ball in the hoop for the drill to end. That's just not what we do. And it takes time. It definitely takes time. And there's 100% frustration there. I think it's less about having those conversations like, hey, she's not, remember you were there once, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you were in 7th grade and we had to have patience with you. And your upperclassmen, how did they talk to you? How did they treat you? Now it's your chance to speak to these kids who aren't quite at the level of what we're used to just yet. How are you going to make an impact on them? But it's okay to be frustrated. It's just, how are we dealing with that? Like, are you throwing your hands up in the air? Are you pulling that kid to the side, and are you actually talking to them and being a mentor?
Well, I think that even if your team doesn't, necessarily have like the aspirations to like necessarily win a state title, you could still have your leaders be like, hey, like, we still finish out drills, or we, these are the things that we do. And regardless of maybe even like what your aspirations are, just that if that's the standard that you want to set, and, this is what we're going to hold each other accountable for, then kind of like you said, like, it's okay for those players to, get a little frustrated, or to, get on some teammates, so to speak, because that kind of leads into that whole like idea of like player-led accountability. Like, yes, there's a certain way you want to phrase it. You want your seniors to, talk to your other players, but that it is kind of okay for that to happen. But it is something that they have to be taught, I think, how to communicate that message so they don't just like blow up on their teammate or things like that. And for those listening, just as a quick plug, if you haven't listened to episode 27, I was actually interviewed a collegiate player who talked about her experience having those aspirations and getting frustrated with her teammates who maybe didn't put the same work ethic as she did. So yeah, it's definitely something that happens. So are there things now, like, in-game situations that you are holding players accountable to, where it's like, okay, like, this is what we as a team do when we're on the court, and if this isn't something that you do, like, I don't care how good you are, like, you're going out, or there's going to be some consequence? What are some in-game situations that are really important to you in your team?
That's a good one. Especially as an assistant coach,
Mm-hmm.
I cared a lot about our bench energy. And if there were kids who were sitting there who were either sulking because they weren't happy with their own performance, they thought they should have been in the game, whatever the case might have been, like, you clap for the girls who are on the floor at any point in time. It doesn't matter if we're up 20, down, whatever the case is, we bring the same amount of energy on the bench. Everyone gives, we call them touches, high fives. No one is too good to do those things. I think another one is just running in and out of the game. And it's funny you say this, because there's obviously, I was telling you kind of about the different levels, and that presents different challenges.
Mm-hmm.
I had a 5th grade AAU team with Empire last year, and I had one kid walk into the game, her shirt was untucked, and the other kid walked right out of the game. They didn't speak, and they were just subbing. And I called a timeout, and I ripped them. And I had a kid on the team who, sweetest little thing, raised her hand. It's like, I don't understand why you're mad. I was like, because we run places. You're excited to go into the game. Kid sends you out, you sprint off the floor. It's just what we do. Like we sprint to everything, and that is the standard that we hold each other to. Your shirt is tucked in, you sprint in the game, you give your teammate a high five, you tell her who you were guarding, and you sprint out. I said, that drives me insane. And she was like, oh, okay. And now slowly, they're in 6th grade now, you see them telling each other like at clinics, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And some of the new kids that join us, I always say, like, you could go home and you could think Coach Christina's crazy. Like, what'd you learn today? Just pick a teammate up when they fall.
Yeah.
I said it's not traditional because we don't often focus on these things, but I think it's huge for championship teams. And that could be a 5th grade championship at a random tournament in New York City, or that could be a New York State championship in the AA bracket. But I think winning teams have certain things in common, and they're very disciplined. And it's just important, you know?
So I'm just gonna have you follow up on that. I'm pretty sure I know what your answer is, but I want to make sure that it's out there. Like why do these things matter so much to you? Like what, I mean, because I can tell that you're passionate about this. I can tell that like the way that, sprinting to and from, and the way that the bench and the energy and things of that nature, I can tell that they're very important to you. So I think I can get the answer, but I want to make sure I have you say it. So why are those things so important for you? And then why should coaches possibly be aware of those things and want to implement those things too?
I think it's about culture. And I don't think that looks the same for any two coaches. So I say it's important to me and to our program. And that doesn't mean it has to be important. And it doesn't mean that another coach is less successful at all because of anything along those lines. But to me, that's always been something that speaks to our culture. When people are in the stands and they see a Lehigh kid and she goes over to them after the game and shakes their hand and says, hi, my name is so-and-so, like, thank you. That's the reflection of our program, or a reflection of our culture. And I think just being disciplined, you build good habits. They're ready for pretty much any situation they're going to be put in, which is our goal, right? Like we want them to show up to the first day of college practice and be ready to go. And I think that idea of discipline and culture are the strongest things you could teach kids. I mean, essentially the ball stops bouncing at some point.
Love
and
that
if
phrase.
they're a good teammate, and if they're coachable, which I think those are the qualities that you're getting when you talk about these types of things that we hold them accountable with, they're going to be successful in life.
And so it goes beyond basketball then, and the way that, like you mentioned, the way that they conduct themselves, the way that they sort of go about their business. It sounds like to me, like it's not necessarily anything like basketball related, and it's like if you do these things and you have these practices, these are the things that you believe, like if you do these things, they're going to serve you well later, like you said, like when the ball does stop bouncing.
Right. I just think, all right, you're early to practice, you're early to a job interview. 15 minutes, if you're not 15 minutes early, you're late. You can't just go strolling into an interview one of these days, so I think kind of setting those things early, they're just so relatable in every aspect.
Yeah, and I think that's something that always, I think, as coaches, that we have to kind of think about and consider, like the things that we want to hold our team accountable for, the way that they play, and the things that happen, maybe more X's and O's, but then also a separate set of like, okay, what are the things I want to hold them accountable for, because I know it's going to help them be better people and grow up to be better people. And I think that is something that's definitely important for coaches to consider. Now, I want to ask, because I think that we kind of all have our stories with this when it comes to accountability. Like when you have things that you hold players accountable for, there are tough decisions or times when you really have to enforce it, and it may be a tough decision that you have to make, or it may be something that, oh man, I really didn't want to have to hold you accountable for this because of whatever, but I know I have to. Have you had situations like that where, you had to hold somebody accountable and it was tough for you, or it was a tough decision, or it just got to that point where, it may hurt the team in some capacity short term, but you had to do it anyway?
We had one of the best players in the country a couple of years ago. The
can hear it
greatest
in your
kid.
voice.
The greatest kid. Like, I love this kid to death. She's playing in college now, doing awesome. We were away. She forgot her practice jersey, and she missed the bus. She slept through it. We were playing the number 3 team in the country. She sat. And that was one of those, like, I just wish somebody woke you up for the bus. Come on now. Like, it hurt so badly. We had just made the long trip the night before down to the DC area. It was one of the biggest games of the year. And I would like to think it has made her a better person and more successful in college. And we told her, like, listen, no one's bigger than the team. No one wanted to do it. Like, it doesn't feel good when kids break these rules. It does not feel good. You have like that pit in you, but you know what? She never missed a bus again. Yep. At least not us. But I think that was probably one of the toughest ones. And, you know, and not that any of them are easy, but you stack up everything. We're on an away trip. In fact, one of our other assistant coaches had just had his second daughter. She was just born the day before. He had just drove down to the tournament, and he was like, I cannot believe so-and-so is not playing. Like, you didn't tell me before I made this. And I was like, listen, she missed the bus. And he was like, come on. And it hurts everybody. But you know what? I think those are the greatest learning moments.
How did your team react to that decision?
Oh, they were pissed.
Yeah.
They were pissed at her. First, pissed at us, right? I think that's the first stage. And then they understand, you know what? She broke a rule. If any one of us did it, you know, that it is what it is. Like, coach, I understand you have to do this. And then they were pretty pissed at her, which I think is okay. Like, I definitely think that that's okay. And in fact, you almost want that a little. Like, if they can be pissed, like, I'm pissed so-and-so was late to class and we had to run. Okay. Yeah. Well, now the pressure's on you because you can't let your teammates down. I think that's a whole different level. It's one thing to let your coach down. It's another thing to let, like, your sisters down. That's a totally different ball game. I think you feel it a little different. So, absolutely.
And the players never forgot that, and they know, and I think that what that does is, you know, that tells them, like, well, I for sure know that, like, all of us are going to be held accountable, and you make that decision and stick with it. Like, there will be no, like, disagreements or arguments or anything like that in the future. Like, clearly this is something that matters because this was the consequence for, you know, this not happening. And I think that is in an ideal situation, you know, that frustration or whatever gets turned to, like, the player, and then hopefully that leads to, like, them, like, helping each other out, or, you know, make sure that, you know, you're awake and you know, holding each other accountable in that way, so that those consequences don't end up happening. And that if that works out, then just makes your team better, now that, you know, they're holding each other accountable even more because that situation had just happened. Right. And with that, I know when it comes to accountability, I know that when you are holding your team accountable, I know that your players are always watching the coaches as well, and seeing that the coaches are holding each other accountable, or that the coaches are, you know, doing the things that they want to hold the team accountable for. And I don't want to assume, so I'll just ask, like, is that very important for you and your staff to be aware of, that you are also following through and are holding each other as a staff accountable for the same things that you're holding the team accountable for?
Yeah, absolutely. I also think that's something I haven't really been the greatest at in my career. Like, when I was young and I would start and a kid would roll her eyes at me, my body language was not always great. I would be like I was visibly angry or upset with it. Yeah. And that's something that, as I've gotten a little older, I've understood how important body language is. I mean, at the end of the day, coaching high school basketball, coaching young kids, they're kids. And they're here to learn, right? And if I can't set a good standard, how can I ever expect them to do it? And I don't think it's that there's always going to be passion, and there's always going to be, I think it's even good to argue in instances. And our old head coach, who I played for, Rich Slater, and I used to go back and forth. Like we were always going back and forth, and that continued when I was his assistant. In front of the kids, we always had a united front, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was really important. And I held him accountable, and he held me accountable.
Mm-hmm.
There were days where he would say, "You were not on your game today." And I think that's honestly where I learned a lot of this from, where it is all of us in a program. Like it takes a true village of everybody holding each other to these standards, but they're kids who are always watching, and they're sponges. Yep. And they're always absorbing. So if you're off for a day, it doesn't matter. Like you lost them, mm-hmm. right? So I think that's really, really important, and something that I've tried to kind of preach to our staff, and both in every single arena, both people that work for us, people that work in our athletic department. It's all about body language, and if you're asking them to do something, you better be doing it.
Yeah, and it's not easy. Like you mentioned, no. It's not. It doesn't come necessarily like naturally, and I think it takes a fair bit of restraint, and you have to kind of swallow some things down, or react differently than maybe you would want to. But like I think it just makes your team. I'm sure it makes your team stronger and the bond stronger when they know, like, all right, this is my coach is doing it, and I know that their staff is doing it, so I definitely am going to do it. Like, because then they know that it really is something that's important. Because if the coaches aren't, doing something and they're telling the players to do it, I can imagine the players will be like, well, is it really that important? Because clearly the, coach doesn't care, or like, it doesn't matter to them. If I always use the example, like if we just preach being on time and then coach is always late, well, like, does it really matter? I think that, that would be one of those things.
It's a breach of trust. Mm-hmm. Essentially too, right? Like if you're asking these kids to give you everything you have and run through a brick wall for you, they need to know that I'm on the other end running through a brick wall for them. It might look different, and I might be in the office watching film for hours, and I'm asking them to get shots up for hours.
Mm-hmm. Right, but it's the same idea of like, right, it's the same idea of, though, like, I'm putting in all this work, you're going to put in all this work, we're going to be doing different forms of work, but we are still working incredibly hard to get to that point. Yeah, exactly. Now you kind of touched a little bit on it about some things off the court about holding accountable, and that's a tricky one, because you're not there, and it's not necessarily maybe like your team. It could be like things in the classroom or things that players are doing like outside of basketball. What level of like accountability, I hate to use the word control, but like what level of accountability do you hold your players to in terms of their conduct and the way that they conduct themselves away from the court?
I think wherever they go, they're a reflection of our program. I think on social media, they're a reflection of our program. In the classroom, reflection of our program. They go to the supermarket, reflection of our program. And I think that looks very different across different ages. So with our high school girls, if you talk back to a teacher, that is our problem. that is a Lehigh Lady Crusader problem as far as I'm concerned. If you go out into the community and you're rude to a stranger or anything along those lines, or you're doing anything that you wouldn't be proud of, essentially, that's an issue. Because I think when you play for a program, you're a part of something, right? It sounds corny, but you're a part of something that's bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
So you represent your teammate who maybe didn't make that decision, but you know what? You now are a Lehigh Crusader, and I think it works positively, and there are definitely benefits, but there are also negatives when it comes to being a part of a special program like that. I think the positive aspect is some college coaches call us and they know a kid that comes from Lehigh, they take care of stuff in the classroom and they have a reputation. But I mean, we're at a small school. We have 400 kids, a school that I personally went to. So if you're not taking care of business in the classroom, there can't be basketball. You know what I mean? Or if you're doing something that doesn't reflect the values of our program, that affects the 11 other kids and our entire coaching staff. So I think when we talk about holding people accountable, it's so when they go out there, they're representing our program well, they're using their platforms well, which is a big thing that we've spoken about this year, honestly, is just using their platforms for positive change. But then you talk about it at the younger level. And when I speak to our younger kids at clinics about holding each other accountable, it's one day you're going to go to a tryout and coach is going to say, okay, line up on the baseline, and you might be the only kid that runs there. And then after the workout's over, you're going to go thank coach, shake their hand and say, thank you very much. And you might be the only kid who does that. But you know what? Someone's going to say, oh, that's an Empire kid. They clapped the entire time. They gave touches. And I think it's non-skill related. All of these things are, you're not born with it. It's not talent that you're given from God. It is none of that. So I think off the court and those little things, even when you're on the court, but that aren't necessarily X's and O's related, it's just what reflection do you want them to be, and are they bought in, and is this your culture that you're trying to share with everyone?
And I'll ask it kind of as a follow-up for that, because I think that's great, especially like the classroom stuff and the supermarket and the social media stuff. I guess I'll just ask for you and your staff, like, how do you find that you have like the energy for that, or the energy to like really make sure that these things are following through on, and that you're holding them accountable for things off the court as well? Like, in terms of commitment, I imagine, and I could be wrong, I imagine that is quite the commitment for you and your staff to really get that message out and hold them accountable. So just from a time and energy aspect, how are you and your staff able to do that?
Well, now you know why I want a player-led accountable
Exactly.
team. I'm just kidding. You know what? I think when you sign up to coach kids, it's a full-time job. And if you think it's just during the hours that you're on the court every day, you'll quickly be mistaken, and it's a rude awakening. So I think it's more so about establishing that culture, and then essentially some of it does take care of itself. Mm-hmm. It's not to say it's not exhausting at times, though. We've had teams in the past where it's been week after week, one thing happens, another thing happens. This is on social media, and it is draining, because you know what? You signed up to coach basketball, right? Yep. But I think you also signed up to teach kids, and you signed up to make them better people. And if you want to be great on the court, I don't know many successful teams who are great on the court and awful off of it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just a piece of the puzzle. And yes, it can definitely be exhausting. Mm-hmm. And I think it takes a lot of buy-in. I think it takes a lot of commitment to it. But I just go back to that. I mean, all the championship teams that you look at, I think they're great in multiple areas.
Mm-hmm. And like you kind of mentioned, there is like that certain level of like, we'll call it like pre-work, but like a lot of work that you do on the front end, especially to like establish all these things. And then hopefully, as you kind of mentioned, that word or that idea about like the culture of your program sort of gets out. And then there's an initial, almost like an understanding for people who are coming into your program, like, oh, like I know that this is what I'm going to have to do, because look at what this program has done for years and years before I even got here. So hopefully there's a little bit of a situation like that as well, where like there's something that they already know kind of what they're stepping into. But I think for like new coaches or young coaches, I think that is something that they're going to have to be aware of, is that, if those are the things you value about the things off the court, that is going to be probably a significant amount of work in the beginning, but then hopefully it all sort of pays off at the end and gets the results that you want. Fingers crossed. So I wanted to make sure that we touched on this also, this idea about like kind of like the little things as well. And in terms of like accountability and like what those little things are. So I think for some people, and maybe me included, and I think of like the term like the little things, I think of things that are like they matter to me, and like maybe there are little details that are important to me that may not necessarily matter to others. So what are kind of like your like little things that you definitely make sure that people are held accountable for? I know we touched on some previously, but are there some other little things that are really important to you?
Yeah, I have a variety. I guess some people could even call them like quirky things to an extent. I mean, the ones we spoke about, I think if a player goes down, every single person on the floor sprints over and picks them up. Mm-hmm. I just think it's a huge culture thing. It says a lot about our program. I've had kids who don't understand it in the past. I've had kids who think it's silly and think it's stupid, and that's okay. You know what I mean? Eventually they will buy into it. I think giving touches is one of the really big things. Like we spoke about a little bit with Empire, just how it was started, but positive interactions. I think the mind and having support and confidence can do so much for players, and being supported by people who have your back. I mean, if a kid misses 5 shots, a shooter's going to keep on shooting. If a teammate tells her she's making the next one, your percentages go up wildly. Acknowledging a teammate, giving a good pass might be silly, might be stupid, builds team culture, little things like that. And then you have the quirky ones where our shirts are tucked in all the time. Like you sprint from drill to drill. College coaches are in the gym. I was taught you always shake their hand and thank them for coming. Little things like that where, yes, they're intangible. It does not show up in the newspaper, does not show up in the box score at all. We have kids who do little things, and I mean, I consider that to be a charge in a game. Like, you're not going to wind up on the front page of Newsday by us if you take a charge. But we have kids who do those things, and they sacrifice their bodies because they care about the team, and they care about all those things. And without all of those little things put together, we're not very successful. So I think there's a wide range of what those things can look like. But did you say thank you today? Did you say thank you to mom and dad for driving you? Again, it sounds silly, but someone brought you here. And I don't know. I just think it could be a wide variety of things. And I mean, for us here, it is those things like running to get somebody, running in and out of the game. And I've had kids who genuinely look at me like I'm crazy when they first like meet me. Like, wait, I can't believe you're mad that I didn't give her a high five. Like, I'm livid. we expect that here. And that's a part of our culture. And I expect you to then take that to wherever you go and to some tryout, because guess what? There's room on rosters for kids who do the little things. And there's opportunities that are open for them, and it's all about connections and relationships. And if you're doing those things and you're taught to do them, as silly as you might think, it's going to help you out one day.
Yeah, no, I 100% agreed. And as I alluded to earlier, you know, even if those players' aspirations aren't necessarily to keep playing, like, just those little things will help you in a job interview, or they'll help you, like,
Right.
if you're talking to a professor, if you go to college, or just like little things like that about just the way that you conduct themselves. And I think you probably, I mean, I'm sure you have noticed like huge just improvements from players from when they first come to you to when they leave as seniors. And I'm sure that you have plenty who are grateful and who are thankful, or maybe even those who come back and are like, wow, like, you know, these little things or whatever that I was held accountable for, like, they really served me well. And some of them, maybe you can speak to this, whether they come back and acknowledge you for it, or you yourself just know, like, I know that there was no way you were going to do this when you first came to me, but like, look at you now, sort of thing.
Yeah, and it doesn't always happen that gracefully, I'll say. I think for some kids, and I was definitely one of them. Like, I always followed the rules, definitely to an extent a goody two shoes, did what I was supposed to do, very on time. And I played for a very demanding high school coach, obviously the man who was here before, and then came back to work for him. And I'm 26 now. I don't know if I fully appreciated every single thing he did for me until like recently. And every step you take, and you have new journeys and new challenges, I think you start to appreciate different things. Oh, someone taught me that, right? Like, I didn't just wake up and come up with these ideas, but somebody took their time to instill that in me, and now I can share that with other people. So it's not as easy though. Like, they go to college, come back, and thank you. Some kids, I think it takes time, and they notice it in stages, but you'd like to think, right, that you're making a difference and they use those skills whether they notice or not.
Well, yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. And I think that for a lot of like coaches and teachers as well, there are going to be things that you teach your students or teach your players that they're going to learn from you that, like you said, they're never going to remember that they learned that from you, or they're never going to like think like, oh, like this is a skill that I got from so and so. They're just going to do it, and they might never realize or understand that it came from a certain person. But even if they don't recognize you for doing it, like as a coach or as a teacher, you still know that you did it. Like you still have to know, like, I know that I gave you or helped build some sort of structure for you to give you some sort of skill set, and whether you recognize it or not, you are a much different person than you were before, and you'll probably be a much more successful one. And so I think that, like you said, you'll probably get some odd looks, but I think it's better to get those odd looks or those weird looks for those things when they're younger than for them to just never learn it and then just leave your program and never
Right.
have done those things at all.
It's not for everybody. Not
That is
everybody
true.
buys
Yep.
into this. That is definitely the case, but you get some pretty special ones who make the decision that they want to, and then it's a forever type of thing.
Well, that's kind of a good point to mention too. I think when you have your program and you have the things that you are holding people accountable for, I think as a coach, you also do have to understand, like, this won't necessarily be for everyone, and that's okay. Like there are going to be certain people where just they this might not be the program for them, or they might not click with me, and that's okay. Like I'm not going to change what I'm holding people accountable for just because it doesn't necessarily work for this person. And I think that might be a tough lesson at first to deal with, or like you really want this player, so to speak, but they're not going to be in line with what I want them to do, then it just isn't going to work. And I think that there's a process, kind of like you mentioned, of just sort of like letting go and just like being okay with that, because you have all these other players who are, and those are the ones who you're going to be working with.
Right.
So to wrap up, I asked the same two questions that I asked every guest. So I'll start with this first one here, Coach. What is a coaching moment of yours from your coaching career that you think others listening would be able to learn from?
That's a good one. A moment from my coaching career that I think others can learn from. When I was my first year coaching, we played in one of the best tournaments in the country. And one of our best players that has ever been in the program was having a tough time. And instead of communicating with her, I'd communicated with another coach. And the player had thought I was kind of talking behind her back about her. It sounds kind of childish, honestly. But I really hurt that kid in that moment. And looking back on it, I wish I had just communicated with the kid. Like what I was saying, I felt was totally on point and totally truthful. Why couldn't I just say it to her? You know what I mean? And as assistants, you talk and whatnot. And I love the kid to death. Like I really, really do. She's an awesome kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought she was having, I don't know, I don't even remember what it was, honestly. I remember looking at our coach and being like, is she kidding me? Like, is she kidding me? And from then on, like our relationship took a hit. It really did, because we had a great relationship where I could put my arm around her and be like, are you kidding me? And I think just the idea of transparency and being able to communicate with these kids on every level and having them understand that you have their back even if you get on them.
Mm-hmm.
And because you get on them, you love them even more. I would say that was, for me at least, a really teachable moment, just moving forward. Like, how would I handle that in the future with other scenarios? And you're in the heat of the moment. I mean, we're playing one of the top teams in the country. There's 4 minutes on the game clock. Like, tensions are high with players, with coaches, on our coaching staff. Like, you're yelling across a ton of fans, things like that. And I think the kids come first, and communication is number one. And your relationship with a kid is far greater than anything in that moment,
Yeah.
So that was definitely a teachable moment for me.
And I think that what I kind of get from that is, like, especially in those kind of like high pressure moments in a game when you're coaching, is to like stay as calm as you can and to stay as like even keel as you can, because you probably are going to need to, have that conversation with a player. And if your emotions are like way out there, you probably aren't ready to have that conversation with a player. And if you end up talking about it with somebody else, like you said, then that player's like, oh, they're talking about me. So like all of a sudden you just created a situation where it's like, well, no, that wasn't the case. I just didn't know what to say or how to talk to you in that moment. But it is hard. And I think though that, now, because you kind of learn from that experience, I'm assuming now it's like, okay, I'm going to make sure that, keep myself ready to be able to talk to the player, because that's where the communication needs to happen. And then, go from there.
Absolutely.
It's some of these things, Coach, we just learn from having to go through them.
Make a ton of mistakes and just keep making different mistakes. So we tell the girls.
Don't make
the same one twice, but you can keep making them.
Making new ones, right? That's funny. So to wrap up, what I give every guest, I call it like 60-second soapbox. It's their platform to get out their closing message, their final thought, or their final idea that they want the listeners to hear. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor, Coach, to get out your closing thought to our listeners. So go ahead.
Well, first of all, this is awesome. I had a ton of fun. You gave me some good questions, I have to be honest, but I think the greatest thing that we can speak about is things that weren't related to X's and O's. We just spoke for about an hour about the game of basketball, and we spoke about pretty much everything that had to do with intangible qualities. Doing the little things, right? Running to pick a teammate up, running into the game, little things like that, but also touches and giving high fives, lifting teammates up, making them better players, and making people around you better. We also spoke about doing things off the court, right? And not just having a coach holding you accountable, but how do you really build towards a player-led accountable program? And what does that look like? How do you hold kids accountable? And I think the first question you asked me was, what does it mean to be accountable or to hold somebody accountable? Mm-hmm. And I think the really cool piece is we touched on pretty much every aspect that builds a culture of a program. And I said one thing along the lines of championship teams, they're not just great on the court. They're often great in every single aspect. And we're preparing these kids to be great, both on and off the court, right? Mm-hmm. Whether that be at their job interview, down the line, any situation in life. And I think that's so huge, because the game of basketball is not just X's and O's. Don't get me wrong, it's a huge piece of it, but you also hit the nail on the head when you said a large part of our job is making sure they're taking care of business in the classroom and on social media, and a lot of time goes into that. So I think if you're passionate and you're willing to build a true culture and then hold them to that culture, I think to an extent, success takes care of itself, and it's what you define success as, right? Like it's not always wins and losses.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And the successes of just building better people like that in Absolutely. And of itself is a success. And so, yeah, no, I 100% agree with that point. Absolutely. And like I said, we didn't really talk any sort of X's and O's, but like I said, just this topic of accountability, I think, is just one that's worth its own episode to talk about. And I think that there's a lot that, we can think about, those listening and myself included, about, the things that we value and what do we truly hold our players accountable for, and what are the things that are important to us. And I think as we sort of just reflect on our own program, like we talked about earlier, it doesn't have to be the same things. The things that are important to you don't have to be the same that are important to me or those listening. But like we said, like, what are those things that we value, and what are those things we want to hold our players and our staff accountable for? So I think that this is a great opportunity for reflection on those things. So Coach Raiti, I want to thank you for spending some time talking about your program, talking about accountability, and just in general, just making better people. So thank you for spending some time. Good luck going forward. And I hope you have some games that you get to coach soon.
Oh, geez. Me too. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you all for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We will see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.